And welcome everyone. Thank you for giving up some of your Saturday to come to this session. I know for some folks it might be early morning, others late at night, still others mid-afternoon. So thank you for coming. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes doing an overview, but this is really an AMA. So my hope is that you'll have lots of questions and I'll have lots of answers. So just a few minutes to start, a little about me, about how I got into this, and some overall context. Though feel free to start putting questions in the chat, and I'll just go through them once I finish the brief introduction. So my name is Mark Herschberg. I wound up here through an unexpected series of events, which some people might think, well, it's a little ironic given what I talk about, because I talk about careers being planned. But what I really say is we need to plan a career, but then adjust that plan as we go. And so I began my own career back in the 90s. I came out of MIT, I have a couple degrees in STEM areas. I started off as a software engineer. But early in my career, I started to feel I'm good at the tech stuff, but something isn't quite working. I'm missing out. There's something off. And I began to understand that it's not just about doing the technical work. Now, technical doesn't just mean programming in my case. It could mean accounting or sales, whatever your discipline is, but that there's more to it. There are these other skills. And they're skills we've all heard about: leadership, networking, negotiating, communicating, all the skills people tell us are important, but no one actually sits down with us and tells us how to do it. In fact, if you think about it, you've probably had more formal training in how to tie your shoes than you've had on a skill like networking, because no one's ever sat you down and said, let's talk about how to do it. So I began to train myself and quickly realized these are not just skills for me and my path onto the C-suite. Really, everyone in the company should know this. So I began to upskill my entire organization. And as I was doing this, MIT, where I'd gone to school, they had been getting feedback from others saying, from companies, saying, we want to see these skills in the people we hire, and we're not finding it. Not just in your students, not just with engineers, not just with college grads, but universally, we're having trouble finding these skills. Can you help us? And so MIT decided we need to get these skills into our students because they're not part of the regular curriculum. When I heard about this, I reached out. I said, I've been developing some training programs for my own team, and I'm happy to give them to you. I thought that was it. One and done. Take it. Best of luck to you. Instead, the director of the program said, well, why don't you help us create some more content? Because we're really under the gun here. And so I sat around with the team and we worked on some new content. And they said, we have these great professors, but you bring a different dimension as a practitioner. We need to get people like you to co-teach with the professors. So they brought in myself and others like me. And for more than 2 decades, I've now been teaching at MIT, in addition to my primary career, which is building tech startups. So I was doing that for a while, and then unexpectedly wrote the book, The Career Toolkit. I say unexpectedly, I wasn't trying to write a book. Really, I was just thinking about, well, we need to create some notes for the students. Our class is very interactive. It's not us lecturing at the students, it's doing, it's practicing, it's trying. And that's a great way to teach, but the students really don't spend a lot of time taking notes. So I kept saying, let's write down some notes. Let's give them something, especially because the students are at one point in time learning this, but then they might not remember it months later at their summer internships or their jobs, because you have this long distance. And students are just very focused on here and now. In fact, we all are. So I said, let's give them some notes, but for various reasons that never happened. And I began writing up notes. I thought I'd be writing 20 pages of notes that we just hand out to the students. Here, take this as a takeaway from the class and keep it with you. But what began as 20 pages of notes became 40, then 80. Once it passed 100, I said, I don't think these are notes. I think this is a book. And that led to the book, The Career Toolkit, totally unexpectedly. And then said, well, there's more that didn't get into the book, and there's more that goes on. So I began writing the blog, which is what probably many of you have read. I have the blog on my website, and I cross-post to Medium. And most of you, I'm guessing, found me on Medium. And so that's what I've been writing about. I generally stick to things related to the book. So I've got 10 skills, professional skills in there. So things related to our careers or professional development. That's what I tend to blog about. I have another blog for Cognosco Media. I talk about the future of media, and I'll actually have another session in 25 minutes where I talk about the future of media there. But here we're going to be talking about careers. So with that, let me pause the formal remarks and start opening to questions. Since I don't see any questions yet, let me do the following. I am going to share a page. I tried this earlier, so I think I'm going to get this right. I'm going to share a page with you, and this is just going to have a way you can get more out of the blog. So let's see if I can do this correctly, and please, someone in the chat, tell me if I am correctly sharing. We're going to share a screen. There we go. Actually, I want to share a window. Is the window being shared? Are you able to see it? Let's see. Okay, the window is not being shared, so we might be having some technical problems there. What I will do, I'll start answering questions. We're going to skip the screen sharing. I'm going to mention there is a tool. Let's see if I can do the call to action. Nope, the call to action, every time I fill it out, the call to action disappears after we fill it out. I'm going to put into the chat the URL, and I will start answering questions in a moment. I created an app called Brain Bump. This is completely free. And the reason I created it is because where you read information isn't where you need information. You might be reading one of my articles on networking tips, and you're probably reading that sitting at home, maybe as you're commuting to work. Say, oh, hey, this is useful, this is nice. But you don't need those tips until months later at a different location. So we have a disconnect. So the Brain Bump app, what it has is all the tips from my blog, also from my book, and dozens of other books, blogs, podcasts. We're continuing to add more content, and it puts them right in your pocket. It's all completely free. There's nothing, I'm not trying to sell you anything. It's 100% free. But this way, when you are going into a networking event months later, and you think, there were some good tips Mark had in his blog, and there were some good tips in those other books. I wish I had them here and now. You can pull out the app, and in seconds, you go and pull up the networking tips right when and where you need them. So think of it like a cross between a flashcard app. It's not so much Q&A, it's here are the tips, but they're all tagged by topic, like hashtags. So you can get management tips, or you can get networking tips, and you can either pull it up just in time, or you can set a daily reminder, because how often do we read an article and you say, oh, yeah, this is great, but then you're going to forget a day or two later, because unlike school, we don't study. So you can set effectively a daily affirmation. You decide when you want to receive it. Let's say 9 a.m. as you walk in the office. And this is just going to help keep it top of mind. So that's a completely free app. And I put the link in the chat, and has all the tips from my book, from my blog, 100% free. Okay, so I see a couple questions coming in. I'm going to start with the QA. I see some in chat as well. First question, how should we think about adapting to a stressful work environment versus quitting? Yeah, good question. Many of us have been in stressful environments, myself included. The first question is to ask, is this temporary or systemic? We might all get put on some project that's just, this is a terrible project, or I have to work with someone from another group just on this project. It's going to be frustrating, but it's going to be temporary. And if this is a 3 or 6 month project, you can say, well, I'm going to get this much stress, and then how much benefit do I get? And really weigh the pros and cons, and can you handle that much stress for that annoying coworker, or whatever it is, for that fixed period of time. That's different from, I have a bad boss, or a hostile work environment, or just something that's systemic, that is going to be long-term. And so there again, it's going to be the same calculation, but it's not fixed. It's just, here's the trade-off, right? It's like saying, lower salary, but I really love the work, versus I hate this work, but they're just throwing barrels of money at me. And you're making that trade-off of what feels appropriate. So when you think about the stressful environment, you have to say, if this is ongoing, do the benefits, the compensation, what I'm learning, the mission, whatever it is that you feel is part of your compensation, offsets that. And remember that this is not an absolute discussion, it's a relative discussion, because you're making this trade-off at your company, and maybe there's some balance. Say, well, I've got this much net benefit because stress is this much, benefits this much, so I got this much net benefit. But then there's all these other jobs over here, and they might have a much bigger payout or smaller payouts. And so the question is this net benefit better or worse than all these other options here? So do look out, see what your other options are, and do a relative comparison. I'm going to jump back to the chat because I saw some questions there. Okay, we've got a question. Of the 10 skills you mentioned, which are the top 3 and why? I get this a lot. So let me go through the 10 skills and then give my answer to the question. Now, the 10 skills I list, it's arbitrary to call them 10. If you look at lists, if you Google what are the key skills that you need to have a successful career, you will see a list anywhere from 5 to 50. It's all the same list. It's really where you draw the lines, whether you draw into much smaller buckets or a few bigger buckets. I picked 10 somewhat arbitrarily. So the 10 large buckets I have: careers, creating and managing your career plan. A bucket I call it working effectively. I've never had a good title for this. This is a set of skills like managing your manager, understanding corporate culture, corporate politics. These are all the subtle skills about not getting the answer, but delivering the answer effectively in terms of your environment. There's interviewing is another skill. And interviewing, by the way, most people think of it as a candidate. Okay, how do I answer these questions as a candidate? Equally important is that we need to know how to interview from the other side of the table. Many of us are involved in hiring our coworkers, but again, we've had no training. Those are the first 3. Next 3, leadership, people management, and process management. I separate out people and process, and leadership is different from management, although the lines blur quite a bit. And then the last 4 skills: communication, networking, negotiation, and ethics. And so to the question, which are the top 3? I'm going to, you might feel I'm dodging the question, but I feel this is the appropriate answer. There is no top 3. It depends on who you are. If, for example, you are a doctor in a hospital, I certainly hope ethics are really high up on your list. You probably don't have to worry as much about networking because you might say, I'm at this hospital and this is where I want to be for years on end. Or especially if you're an academic, if you're a tenured professor, you're not necessarily trying to advance your career. Now, we can talk about how networking can still help you, even if your title doesn't change or internally, but ethics might be more important in those cases. There are people who are going to show up and say, I know nothing about networking. That's the best skill for you to work on. Others say, I got that down. I don't know how to lead or how to manage. If you're a solopreneur, leadership may not be one of the core skills. You do have to manage clients, but you're probably not leading per se. So there's no universal, this is better than that. It really does come down to who you are and where you're trying to go. I know that may feel like I've dodged the question, but I honestly feel this way. And equally important is to remember, these are not isolated skills. If you are a good leader, you know something about negotiation. If you're a good negotiator, you know something about communication. The skills really do build upon each other. So don't look at as what's the best. Say what is right for me at this stage of my career. Okay, I'm going to scan down in the chat. See. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I do see there is a comment someone made about golden handcuffs. And so, yes, you're right. That certainly we do sometimes get trapped into a certain area where we say we've got the benefits are so good, we feel stuck. But remember again that it is relative. And so the handcuffs are keeping us here because we get some value, but there's always new opportunities. And even if you didn't have an opportunity months ago, last year I looked around and boy, I'm never going to do better than this job. This year is different. So things are always changing. And so don't feel that you're fixed or stuck in one place, no matter how good it is. The world is dynamic. Your company is changing in terms of its outlook and probabilities, but also the other opportunities available. Global macroeconomic events change, and that's constantly changing your current situation versus the other options. We have another question. Question is, where would you rank communication? Is that a baseline skill for everyone, regardless of context, verbal versus written? Communication, I do think that is probably one of the more, you're right, fundamental things, because even as a solopreneur or the CEO of a Fortune 500, you are communicating. Now, communication is one of the more broad skills. Often people think communication, how do I do something like this? How do I get on that TED stage and do a great presentation? Communication also means, how do you write an effective email? A succinct 3-line email that gets your point across to someone who gets buried in 600 emails a day. Or how do you communicate a technical problem? Again, technical, not necessarily software technology, but technical, your domain. How do you communicate that to someone in a very different domain who doesn't have your knowledge? That's a communication challenge as well. So I do think communication is foundational, but here again, it's relative. And I'll use an example within software where we often get people who don't know how to speak to people outside the field. They throw in all those acronyms and technical terms. And if they're a person who is mostly working with other software engineers and technical people, they can use all those tech terms. It doesn't matter that they can't put in terms that my mother could understand, because they'll never have to communicate to my mother or people like her. And so their communication capability can be perhaps more narrow or limited, while other people who say, well, I'm a software engineer, but often I deal with customers or I have to deal with people in other departments, I do need to expand my communication capabilities in that direction. It will be more important for them. So again, I know it always feels like a cop-out where I'm saying it depends. It really does. And that, by the way, is one of the reasons why, as much as I love engineering, I love this stuff, because there's always an it depends. For every rule, you can probably find an exception. And it's understanding those subtleties. That's what makes it really interesting to me. We have another question. What have you learned in teaching these skills in terms of what works best to teach them to people? That is a great question. The key to these skills is that they are different from how we usually learn. If you think back to high school or college, it was a lot of broadcast. It was, okay, class, I'm going to teach you the quadratic equation. And here you go. Here's a formula for quadratic equation. Write down this formula. Now we're going to practice solving the equation. How do you know when to use the quadratic equation? Very simple. When you see a formula that's y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, here's how you solve it. That's it. Done. It's very, very narrow in its applicability. The skills that we're talking about, these are broad and subtle, and it's much more like learning a sport. I can teach you the rules to basketball in probably 30 minutes. You can't double dribble, and you have to shoot from these areas, and this is 3 points, and this is 2 points, and here are the rules. And you go, okay, great, I got all the rules. But just because you know the rules doesn't mean you're going to be a great basketball player. That takes years, decades to really master. And that's what's true of these skills. So when teaching, you don't want to just do lecture-based. What you want to do is interactive and experiential. And this is why that's how we teach it at MIT. And by the way, this is how we teach it at top business schools. It's all experiential and discussion. what I recommend, I'm going to put another link in the chat because I have a bunch of free resources on my website. And everything's all free. Unlike most people of books like this, I do not want to sell you coaching services. I don't want to sell you other stuff. I really do this as a passion project. There is a fee for the book because the people who print it actually like to get paid for that. But everything else, just take it. I don't even ask for your email because I have nothing to sell you. So on this page, the resources page, there's a bunch of free resources, completely free, career tips, how to ask questions as a candidate during the interview process, all sorts of things. But the first link, it's called the Career Toolkit Development Program. And it's how you can create this type of peer learning group at your organization. I'll go through it very quickly and then we'll get to some more of the questions. Create groups, I recommend, of about 6 to 8 people in size, but you can expand it up. And by the way, if you're saying, well, I'm a solopreneur, or my company doesn't want to do this, it doesn't have to be with people at your company. Get people from other companies. If you're a solopreneur, get your peers. And what you want to do is come together and have a discussion about some content. Now, yes, you can use my book, and there's another free download. The Excel sheet says, here's how to take my book and chop it up to use it. You don't have to use my book if you don't want to. Use a different book, use articles, use videos, use podcasts. Go look at some of the other talks that were done on Medium Day and say, oh, let's use this. Let's watch this video and discuss that. Because the key idea is that when you come together, you've, let's say, read a little bit on leadership and you sit down together and you say, well, here's what I took from that. Someone else is going to say, oh, well, I got something slightly different. And you're both right, but now you're expanding the understanding because there's no quadratic formula. Here's how to do it, and it's always right. It's more, well, it could be this way, it could be that way. And even if you say, well, I don't agree with your assessment, it's still helpful to say, I get some people won't see it the way I do. That's helpful as well. And so it's in that discussion that you start to learn. Now, if we go back to sports, when you think about sports, you want to run drills, you want to do scrimmage games, you want to review and reflect, maybe you watch the tape. It's this group that lets you do that because someone can say, here's a challenge I have, or maybe one I had in the past. Here's how I'm thinking of solving it. What do you think? That's scrimmage, that's practice. So this is a technique, these interactive techniques. This is what's going to allow you to really learn by doing, because it's hard to practice in real life. You can't say, hey, everyone, I'm going to try leading a different way. And then you do it and you screw up and everyone's pissed at you and you can't go, haha, time out, do over. That wasn't real the past week. Forget everything I just said that pissed you off. We can't do that. But this group, this discussion, this is where you can explore. So that's a free download for you. But in general, I suggest learning by doing, by these practicings. Okay, a few more questions. I'm struggling with how to call out these types of skills in my resume in a meaningful way. Do you have suggestions? It is subtle. And the problem is you can't say, I'm a great leader, I'm a great communicator. We really want, when it comes to our resume, we want to show results that illustrate. I can't say, I'm going to give a more technical skill, I'm a great salesperson. I can say, I brought in this much revenue last year. I'm a great technologist. Trust me. I can say, I have built software that runs billions of things per hour. And so we want to show results. So if you want to show that you're a good leader, you can say, I've led a team of X. Maybe you got an award, maybe you got feedback. If you're a manager, maybe you say, I managed a team through a difficult transition. If you're a communicator, you can say, I've been speaking at these conferences. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean maybe you're booed off the stage. We can't get into enough detail. No, I was at the conference. People loved me. They gave me a standing ovation. You can't get that detailed on the resume. But still, if you put in some of the results that come from these skills, that begins to illustrate it. And then you can get into more detail once you get into the interview process. Okay, suggestions for learning interview and negotiating skills as a candidate. Interview skills as a candidate. There are, first, I'd say, and I don't want to really sell, in my book where I talk a lot about the other side of the interview process, knowing how the other side thinks is helpful. Because at the end of the day, when you're a candidate, you're really a salesperson. You are selling yourself. You're saying, hey, company, buy this. And the first rule of sales is understand what your customer wants and how they think about the purchase cycle. So understanding the other side is actually really important, will help you be a more effective candidate. But what you can do is mock interviews. Get some other people. You probably know some of the questions. We all know some general questions that you get, but then you can also do a web search and find questions specific to the role that you want, and have other friends come and say, okay, please interview me, and record it. Do a video recording and watch it and look at yourself and look at, was your answer clear, or did you you kind of, oh, I got lost all over the place. Your body language, did you appear with confidence, or were you nervous maybe? And so you can do these practice sessions. Don't just do it for yourself. Mock interview other people, watch them. What do they do well? What techniques do you like? And really break it down and ask, what can I learn? What is it she did well that I want to incorporate into my process? So mock interviews are a great way to do that. In terms of negotiation, there are lots of books, and that's a good way to start. And yeah, there's a chapter in mine. By the way, on that resources page, I list about 30 other books where I've said, these are helpful books. Some I reference in my own, some I don't reference in my book, but I found them helpful. I have no incentive. I don't get any kickbacks. These are just good books I recommend. There's a bunch of negotiating ones. But the best thing you can do is practice negotiations. You can actually buy negotiation case studies from universities, from business schools, and we sit down and I pretend I'm a real estate guy with all these things for sale, and you pretend you're someone buying, and they'll give you the roll sheet. So explain, here's what you're trying to do and why. And then we actually go and negotiate. Now, it usually helps to have someone who's moderating and managing this whole thing. And you can do online courses where you do this. But negotiation, that's an easy one where you can just negotiate, because we have these set engagements where you can practice that. I know we're getting short on time. We've got a couple questions left. Can you speak on good people management and what that looks like? Ooh, that's hard to do in 3 minutes. My favorite book on people management is a book called Peopleware by Tom DeMarco and Timothy Lister. It's on that resource list. And really, people management is about understanding what motivates individual people. We are not all the same. We are all interested in different things. Some people are motivated just by money. Hey, as long as you're paying me a lot, I will show up, I will do my work. Others are more about the mission or engagement. We have different types of motivation. Understanding different people and their motivation is what's going to really help you tie into each person, because it is a one-on-one. Motivation is really personal and unique. Let's see, I see someone said, let's go look at the QA. I might have missed some questions there. How can we develop and cultivate influence without authority? I'm asking as a point of a tech lead individual contributor. I can tell you, even as someone with authority, I'm typically a CTO or CPO, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Product Officer. Anytime I have to say, do it because I said so, which maybe I've done, not those words, but effectively that maybe 3 times in my career, that's a failure. That means I couldn't convince them that what we were doing was right, and I had to use my authority. None of us should be managing by authority, certainly not leading by authority. That is not leadership at all. It is about convincing people this is the right thing. And to do that gets a little bit to that previous question, what's their motivation? Now, it might not be motivation in their career. It might be their motivation, well, they want to solve the problem, and they see A as a bigger impediment, whereas you see B as a bigger impediment. How do you convince them we have to focus more on B rather than A? So it's understanding how they view the world and then speaking to their concerns. I think I've only got a minute left. I see there are some other questions. Feel free to email me, because any questions I didn't get to, or if you want a longer answer, I'm happy to turn this into an article And this will be a blog post. And I'll give you a bigger answer, or even if I gave you an answer but you want more, just email me. Just go to thecareertoolkitbook.com, go to the contact page, send me a message, and I'll turn this into an article for you. I've got to jump to my next thing. Again, brainbumpapp.com. If you download this free app, and you're going to get all the tips from my blog. And as we put out new blogs and we add new tips, that gets added there. And you're going to have them right in your pocket to access anytime. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I appreciate your time today. And I look forward to hearing from you. I write this for you. So please send me feedback, share what you like, what you don't like, and let me know how I can continue to provide value to you. Thank you, everyone.